Many in Israel were preparing for midnight with guarded optimism as the world approached the new year in 2024. Just as the clock struck 12, the sky was filled with missiles and bombs hurling toward the Jewish homeland rather than celebratory fireworks and dazzling light shows. This tiny nation was quickly reminded their very existence ate at the foundational core of evil on a scale not witnessed in the world before. Although Jesus and many biblical prophets foretold of these events thousands of years earlier, the startling realization we are living in times leading up to the end of days remains unnerving to people of all backgrounds. Please consider joining us as we unpack news events, social and political developments, plus activity in space and the heavens that point to the inevitable return of heaven's perfect Son and King in Numbers, Wars, and the New Year. Headlines meets Prophecy, January 2024. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark. You're watching or listening to the Russak Outlook. Thank you very much for joining. Today's discussion is Numbers, Wars, and the New Year, part of a monthly series that we do called Modern Headlines Meets Bible Prophecy. And for this, we're talking about January 2024. This will be a power-packed presentation. Things began literally at midnight. As soon as the clock struck 12 into 2024, things started to escalate. And we'll be breaking all of that down. Before I begin, I just ask if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to take a brief moment and explain some things about what's going to be taking place in the new year for Russak Outlook. Like many organizations, companies, individuals, churches, ministries, you seek the Lord for, what you are to do, or, even if it's not in prayer time for companies, they're looking for what is their vision, their mission. And in my time with the Lord, I believe I heard two very simple words, and it was called lean in. And I believe that this is what the Lord has instructed me to do, to lean into the teachings and to different aspects of what we'll be doing. So I wanted to introduce one of those new elements that will begin next month. And it's part of a webinar series that we're going to do. It'll be the first Saturday of every month. So the first one will be on the 3rd of February. At 4 o'clock Eastern. It's just for an hour. And I would really encourage you to join, because this is where the individuals, we get group participation, because I want to hear from you and other people, whether it's questions, comments. You may have a revelation from the Holy Spirit. Whatever it is, it's a very loose and informal format so that we can all grow together and get a sense of community, if you will. So if you could, remember that. Matter of fact, let me put that up on the screen. So the first presentation will be called Zechariah, the Minor Major Prophet, the 3rd of February, 4 o'clock Eastern. I have the link, the ID, and the passcode up on the screen, as well as a QR code. So if you want to take out your phone or your tablet and put your camera up to that, that will give you the link. But the idea specifically for this, we will be detailing the revelations of Jesus before the Word became flesh from the prophet Zechariah, his ministry on earth, and his future reign. So when I say the minor major prophet, if you're a musician, you probably understand the whole minor major chord pun, if you will. But in all seriousness, this is the largest minor prophet book in the Bible, and he has so much to say, Zechariah, that the Lord revealed to him pertaining to this day and this hour, as well as Jesus' life and ministry on earth, and the specificity of which he knew the details here will just blow you away. So I would encourage you, all are welcome. Please share the information. Anybody can come. And also, if you're a skeptic, if you're a non-believer, I believe you will see some things in this presentation that will have you scratching your head and go, this cannot be coincidence. I mean, it's that good. So we will be doing that. And I would say, if there's a topic or if there's a subject that you want to know more about, please email russackoutlook@gmail.com. Be happy to, or comment on any of the social media, the YouTube platforms. On that note, if you could, please hit the like or subscribe button on whatever platform, Rumble, YouTube, etc. There's something I've heard from a lot of people saying to me that they're happy about what we're doing and what we're teaching because, and this is no knock on any church, it's not, but they're saying some of the information they don't hear in the church, they're not getting. And it's some of it I understand, and some of it I believe there may be areas where churches could be missing it. Particularly, when I like to look at the Bible from a worldly view, what's happening around me, as well as what God is instructing us through the gospel and salvation of Jesus. So on that note, that's the end of my commercial. I'll add one more moment. Please go to therussackoutlook.com and sign up for our email list. You'll see a little prompt come up and join our email list. So on that note, let me get into this. Numbers, wars, and the new year. Prophecy meets headlines. So here you have it. And I'm showing you three major or potential escalations that are going on right now. Nations that I believe are tied specifically to the Bible. The nation of China, you see, and many people are familiar with the threat of war with Taiwan. Everybody, I believe, would be familiar with, obviously, what's happening in Israel and Gaza, and then the Ukraine-Russia war. Both Israel, the surrounding nations, such as the areas of Gaza, the West Bank, or what Christians and Jews refer to as Judea and Samaria. These are all mentioned as end-time players, I'll call it. The kings of the Far East, I believe, is reference to China and some of the surrounding nations there. And Russia is very specific in Ezekiel 38 and 39. We've gone through a lot of that. That references the war of Gog of Magog. So on that note, let me start with a couple of scriptures. Jesus saying in Matthew 24, 6 through 8, when they're asking him, what will be the signs of your return? And he says this, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. I think that's very important. If you're a believer, this is nothing that we're to be afraid of. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginnings of birth pains. So think of a woman, obviously, if she's pregnant, and I'm talking about before she goes into labor, baby kicks, you get a birth pain, and the closer you get to the delivery of the baby, the more frequent the pains or the kicks or the movements, can be. And I believe we are in that process where we're seeing the birth pains. So let me get into some things from Zechariah. And this is part of why I chose Zechariah as the first for the webinars or the Zoom presentations in February. It says this in Zechariah 12, 1 through 5. I'll cut back to video for you with the scripture. It says, the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Notice, too, that he's saying the nation Israel. The Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundations of the earth, and who forms the human spirit within a person, declares, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all of the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. On that day, when all of the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all nations. So we're talking about near the end of the tribulation, but he's saying that all of the nations will be gathering against Israel, will be gathering against Jerusalem. No secret, you look around the world today in the headlines, and we'll get a little bit more further into this. The world is fighting for Israel. The world is fighting for the real estate of the Israel and Jerusalem and that whole area, and that's part of where the main reason Hamas attacked Israel is for that land that they believe belongs to them. So Zechariah, I'm going to stay with Zechariah for a second, 14, 2 through 3. And he says this, I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. We just saw that. And I'm not saying that that's a fulfillment of this prophecy. I believe what we're seeing is events leading up to it. But this is the other part I wanted to, and for whatever reason, it just struck me as I was studying for this. And in the bottom right, it says half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. So the reason I wanted to point that out is that's what Jerusalem's being fought for right now. East Jerusalem, prior to the 67 Six-Day War, was in the jurisdiction, if you will, of the Palestinian people, the Arabs of that area, and they claim that as their capital. So even today, where Jerusalem is officially the capital of Israel, others are fighting against it, and nations, including the United States, with the present administration saying that they will make a consulate in East Jerusalem. So a very huge source of conflict that the world is fighting for, and this is what the prophet Zechariah wrote thousands of years ago. I did also want to show you on the map, in case anybody wasn't aware, of the area of Judah, because he's talking about Judah. So you see that's you're looking at the biblical names of what that area is today. So you would see to the left of that Philistia, which is the Gaza in that strip there, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and so forth. And then this is part of the whole Judea, Samaria, and the battles for the West Bank. But so when you see that in Scripture, I just wanted to give you that visual representation. So let's go into, we know that the Scriptures say that the nations will be gathered against Israel, that they will be coming. So I wanted to look at what happened in the very few first days of the new year. And I'm laughing, but I'm not laughing at the situation. I'm smiling at just the details of God. Like, so here we have at midnight, literally, I'll show you, the stroke of midnight, Hamas attacked Israel again. So, where so many people thought that Israel had gone in and depleted much of the area, over 20 different missiles were sent, and most of them were intercepted by the Israeli Defense Force. But here you have this barrage of rockets. So in other words, this war is full throttle, and literally, as the clock struck midnight, and Jewish people, and I believe I would hope that Arabs would be looking forward to the celebration for the new year. It's difficult if, excuse me, if you're in Gaza, whether you're Arab or there are some Christians in there. My heart bleeds for them or cries for them, and I would encourage all of you to be praying for especially the innocent people who were taken in that situation. They're dealing with just the horrors of wars. I mean, I can't. I've never been in it, but I see it, and I try to put myself in their shoes, and boy, that's tough. And I pray so much for the children, because day after day they're hearing these rockets and these images. So that happened at midnight. What happened on January 2nd? A senior Hamas leader was killed in Beirut, who was a key figure who patched up ties with Iran. They believe he was an intricate role, they being the Israeli Defense Force, in formulating the plan and the strategy for what happened on October 7th. His name was Saleh al-Arari. He served he was a senior leader in Beirut, and many people believe this was a warning to Iran as well as Hezbollah in the area of Lebanon, that they knew where he was and they chose to take him out at such a time. So many people, Nasran Hasrallah is the leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon, in that area. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And many people wonder, what's happening with him, why they expected them to be a little bit more forceful in their attacks. And I think this serves as a warning to him. I'm thinking they probably know where he is, and they're capable of taking him out. I'm sorry about the cough. January 3rd, 95 people were killed in Iran at a blast that was marking General Tsunami. No, I'm saying that wrong. Qasem Soleimani, I apologize, who was the preeminent military leader, was taken out several years ago by the previous American administration. They were marking his death, and a huge explosion took place, killing 95 people at this event. And initially, everybody thought that that was Israel, and interestingly, ISIS took credit for it. And so, and there you have that whole dynamic of the Sunni Shia Muslim factor. So, staying on the subject of wars and rumors of wars and what Jesus was warning about, in this area, you have the Houthis, which are another faction, a group supplied and armed by Iran. It's a proxy. And they're firing and taking out ships and vessels in the Red Sea, and they're trying to stop the trade routes coming in through or out of the Red Sea. And they're doing it pretty successfully. So what happened several weeks ago, the United States launched a multinational initiative to protect commercial ships. And the reason I find this interesting is what they're calling it. The United States has a huge military presence in the Mediterranean now, the Red Sea, and other areas, as well as some of the other European nations, England certainly, and some of the other NATO countries are helping in this area. But because we're going into an election year, I think they're trying to avoid the term war or appearances of war at all costs. But at the same time, I am not a big fan of 46, but I will say thus far, I don't like some of the things in terms of Israel, but I've been pleasantly surprised at how well they have stood with Israel, even though there's been some internal bickering. So I want to show you here on the maps just where this is. You can see the Red Sea right by Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, you look at it and you have Sudan, Egypt, Israel, Yemen, obviously, and so you get an idea on the upper right-hand side, and then you see the trade routes of what that has to happen now. So Maersk, which is I think the largest shipping company in the world, they've already said they're not going through the Red Sea, as a number of other European companies have already stated. So they are going to go around, and you see that in the lower left, around the Cape of Good Hope. And what this does is it adds a couple of weeks to the delivery of goods. So what does that mean? Well, that impacts the economy. That impacts the delivery of goods. So in addition to being a force and a presence deterring people from there, they're disrupting the world's economy. They're disrupting the world's production and delivery of goods and food and services and whatnot. So this is, quite a big deal. Again, staying on that subject of war. So U.S. forces, I show you in the upper left, they have been attacked well over, I think it's around 130 times now since October 7th, and over 151 times since 46 took office. But this isn't being reported. And I believe a lot of this is, the media will at times, and more often than not, be in lockstep with the administration and the directive that's being delivered out of there. So they're kind of downplaying it, but what's troubling is a lot of the military, and they feel abandoned. And you had a couple of soldiers have been wounded, and there's been some minor retaliations against some weapons depots and whatnot. But this is pretty serious. And on the upper right, I show you Israel, obviously planning different war scenarios because Iran is behind this. And you see in the upper right, all of those yellow and black markers indicate where potential nuclear devices, nuclear weapons, delivery, or production. So they're, evaluating all of their different trade routes. I realize I'm saying that, but I didn't cut the video. So in the upper right-hand corner is what I was talking about. You see where Israel is. So that's all, that's all on the block right now. That's all being discussed and evaluated. Then you have Erdogan, the president of Turkey. He has really ramped up his condemnation of Israel right now in this situation, as well as Benjamin Netanyahu. what is very interesting to me, and I'm going to show you a little bit of this, but remember this, just prior to October 7th, they were starting to cozy up relations again. They've had Turkey traditionally up through the 20th century had a good relationship with Israel. Then when Erdogan came in, you had a number of different scenarios where relations were not going well. But there has been a move recently to improve them, and now this happened. So he's really coming out forcefully. And a few days ago, the South African group let in a document, or authored a document that's been signed by many nations condemning what's going on in Israel and calling it genocide. And this is exactly what Erdogan is saying, so he's ramping up the pressure from Turkey. I say all this because Turkey is mentioned in Ezekiel 38 as one of the nations that will be part of the coalition that will march against Israel in the end times. So he's going lockstep and barrel with a lot of the anti-Semitic accusations and language that's going on. So he's saying these are crimes against humanity. And, if you think about genocide and they're comparing it, they're saying Netanyahu is worse than Hitler. It's worse than what was Nazi Germany. It's anything but that. And war right now, what's going on. Let me say this: there was a peace treaty on October 6th. There was no escalations at that point, and so and I'll show you I'll remind you, I should say, because I'm sure many are familiar with some of the barbarism that went against the Jewish people. So, but I guess, I'm trying to point out all of these things are happening. All of these things are ramping up. So Israel right now their military has stated they are in a 5-front war. This tiny, tiny nation, and I'll give you the maps here. So going back to video on the left-hand side, and I put stars by where they're saying that they're being attacked from, and it's not even saying it, they are. Gaza, factions of the West Bank, where you have obviously many Palestinians. Lebanon, we talked about Hezbollah, Syria, and then I show you the arrow leading above that map, which is Iran, and Iran is controlling so much of this. Then they are also saying, they being the IDF and the Israeli military, they're preparing for a 7-front war. They fully expect Iraq, which has a big Iranian presence now. So you see the black star there on the right. And then you see Yemen. We've talked about Yemen and the Houthis. So if you think about Israel and all of those surrounding nations, they're going to be attacked and are being attacked to a certain degree from all sides. So this is an unprecedented situation. And again, I'm going back to what Jesus said about wars and rumors of wars, how that's picking up, and Zechariah and his prophecies and others saying it's specifically going to be happening against Israel. So I wanted to just show you on a map, because many people would say that the Israelis are acting as colonialists. That, again, going back to the whole genocide argument. And their history goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Take the Bible aside. You have archaeological, historical evidence of them in this land, without question, for several thousand years prior to the birth of Jesus. We have historical evidence of the Jews when they were slaves in Egypt. That's all been well documented. And then the historical evidence and the legal evidence of what happened in the 20th century in the transfer of land. And I've covered this, and there's so many other good sources if you want to look at things objectively concerning the ownership of certain sections of Israel and Judea, Samaria, and as some call the West Bank and Gaza. Well, Gaza is Gaza. So let me go to the map. So I'm showing you in that little red arrow in the middle, that's Israel. The surrounding green areas are all of your Sunni Muslims, and the dark green, Iran and parts of Iraq and Yemen, are your Shia Muslims. So you can see how much of the world is covered. You have 22 Arab states, 52 Muslim states, because remember, you go to different parts of Africa, Eastern Europe, what I would call the Stan countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. They are Muslim. And the reason I say that is historically anyway, not saying all, but they are against their ancestral cousins, if you will, if you go back to Isaac and Ishmael. So they are trying to eliminate them. They are trying to, you hear the expression, from the river to the sea. That means they want to take it from the Jordan River out through the Mediterranean Sea and completely eliminate them. So, there's more wars that are going on. We'll cover a little bit more of it about what's been happening in December and January, early January. But I want to pause now because I think this is very, very important to look at what the last couple of months were, and I'm going to encapsulate this in predominantly this slide. If you see the upper right, I'm showing you the rear view mirror, and I think it's important to take a peek back at the end of 2023 for a second. Actually, I'm going to go to 2017. In the upper left-hand corner, you see something that happened called the Revelation 12 star. I know I've covered it. Many others have. This was an absolute miraculous sign that happened on the 23rd of September, the Feast of Trumpets. And without going into a lot of details, the culmination was the birth of Jupiter, which is referred to as the Messiah in Jewish lore, if you will. Anyway, there's a lot to it, but that happened, and it hadn't happened in 6,000 years, and it happened, and specifically the baby looked like it was being delivered out of the Virgo, out of the woman's womb, on the 23rd of September. Fast forward so that hadn't happened in 6,000 years, and it happened in 2017. Then it happened again 6 years later, this past September. Instead of the planet, it was a asteroid, but the same circumstances pretty much. All the stars lined up just as Revelation 12 says, and I'll just read this for you here. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and under her head a crown of 12 stars. And you see all that, just exactly as what Revelation described. And being with child she cried, traveling in travail and pain to be delivered, kind of going back to the birth pains. So this happened in September of 2023, and I will say a lot of people were like, oh, here comes the rapture, and this is what it's going to be. And obviously that didn't happen, but the specifics of this, of what did transpire, I don't believe should be negated or forgotten. And if you wanted to look at historically, oftentimes the Lord will give a warning to the prophets for the people of that area. I'll put it in modern vernacular: get your act together, stop your sinning, come to repentance, and I will heal you. And then if not, judgment is coming. So, what I'm looking at, we saw this in September, 6 years later, we see it again. Does that mean judgment is coming? I'm not saying it is. I don't know, but I am reporting these are the signs that everybody in there, everybody can see them, and you can look this up. I'm not revealing anything here that that's not been documented and verified. So again, you think of the Feast of Trumpets and repentance, but so that happened, right, in September. Then a few days later, Benjamin Netanyahu has a peace plan, part of what would be an expansion of the Abraham Accords, and it's coming together with Saudi Arabia. It talks about some new trade routes that will come from Asia and India up through Israel, and it will just enhance the economic condition, much like we saw the escalations in the Red Sea are causing deterrence. So they were brimming with optimism. They were brimming with peace is coming. And I'm looking at this. Saudi Arabia, if you look at Ezekiel 38, will be one of the nations that says when the nations come against Israel, they will kind of fall back and they will not be involved in it. I'll put it that way. So here we are, brimming with confidence. Everything's going to go well. And so you have these signs. You see what's happening in the United Nations. You see what's happening in the areas. Then October 7th comes. So what happens on October 7th? I showed this once before in an earlier presentation. This is my way of drawing out the area. It's not to scale. Just to give you some reference of what the Mediterranean Sea, that coastline looks like, and the areas, much of the different things of what's been described in the news. Khan Yunis, you hear a lot about today. Rafah, at the border of Israel, Gaza City, and so forth. So the red dots are where the attacks took place. I'm going to very briefly go through this. The day for Hamas. This was obviously in the works for at least a year, if not more. But these people, the soldiers, were not informed of it until that morning after they went to their normal prayer. They received the instructions with manuals about what to do, where to proceed, because today is the day, which happens to be Sukkot. And so this was the last day of the holy days for the Jewish people. And 629, everybody knows what happened. But I just want to detail some of the things because I think this is sometimes lost on people. And it's been verified in video, so I'm not trying to approach this with any bias. I'm trying to report this with as much objectivity as I can, although I will say, I believe obviously in the Word of God, and it does not take me by surprise that people want to remove the Jews from the land here. So the next 3 hours of what happened beginning at 6:30 Israel time, women were raped by the hundreds. Some were shot and killed both during and after the rape. Some were shot after they were shot and killed, then they were raped. Males were raped. Women's pelvises were broken. The soldiers arrived in different areas to just see slews of heads rolling around with no bodies. Male genitalia was cut off and scattered in many places. Babies burned alive. We know of one instance where a baby was put into an oven and baked to death. A pregnant woman was stabbed and had the baby torn out of her belly. They chopped the breasts off of women. They gouged the eyes of men. They chopped off hands and feet of others and led them to bleed to death. I'm saying all this because this is evil at its utmost. This is not anything that I believe is capable of the human spirit. This is demonically influenced. When you go to this extent, to me, spiritual forces were, without question, were unleashed on that day here. And I found it interesting that Haggai 2, chapter 2, says this: on the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of the Lord came to me. We have the 7th month, we know, according to the lunar calendar in Hebrew. And so we know when that was. So we know when Haggai was reporting this. And it was, if you line it up to the Gregorian calendar today, it was October 7th. So that day where Haggai reported, he said this is what the Lord Almighty says: in a little while I will once more shake the heavens and the earth. So whether that you want to call that coincidence or not, but that's what happened on that day, which was the same day as thousands of years earlier what was reported. I'm saying all this because this last slide, to just remind you of what took place in these past couple of months leading up to where we're going in 2024. So last there was a solar eclipse in 2017, that August 21st, 2017. Matter of fact, I'm going to put this all on video now. So you see that on the top, that line going from roughly Oregon straight through and out to the South Carolina area, out into the Atlantic Ocean. So there is something called the Aleph and the Tav, the Alpha, the Omega. Aleph and the Tav is in the Hebrew. And I show you the ancient Hebrew lettering of what that looked like in the upper right. And if you see, then there is a total solar eclipse is coming this April 8th, which will cross. So you see in the top in the middle there, that cross, and it looks exactly like the Tav. So, and in addition to that, this past October 14th, there was a lunar eclipse, and you see where that came down from that Pacific Northwest area and then came out into the Gulf of Mexico. And you see the sign, and it looks like exactly like the Aleph. So, again, you can call it coincidence or not, but this is something that NASA would say could never happen. When you're having two eclipses in the same area, it would have to be several hundred years in between. This is happening 6 years in between. And, so you have to wonder, what is the Lord saying to us? And it also says on April 8th, if you go to Exodus 4:8, that's where the Lord says to Moses, if they don't believe you with one sign, maybe they'll believe you with a second sign, or perhaps they'll believe you. So you had the first sign in August 2017, and now you're going to have this completion of this sign in this coming April. So, I don't believe these are coincidences. As a matter of fact, in Hebrew, there is no such word for coincidence. So now I want to get back to the news, because we talked about wars and rumors of wars. I showed you what's happening in January 1, 2, 3, things that are escalating in that area. And then I just wanted to remind you of what's transpired over these past couple of months, and just because I think it's important to give reference. So now I want to talk about China for a little bit, and what I believe China is referenced, and nations, surrounding nations potentially, in Revelation. Revelation 9:13-16 says this: the sixth angel sounded his trumpet. So this is part of the judgments. You have the seals and the trumpets in the first half of the tribulation, and the bowls in the second half. And I heard a voice coming from the four horns of the golden altar that stood before God. I'll put this on video. It said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who were bound at the great river Euphrates. The four angels that have been kept for this very hour, and day and month and year, were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. So that is equivalent to 200 million. China is the only nation in the world that can boast an army of 200 million. Then I'm going to go to Revelation 16:12-14. The sixth angel poured out his bowl, second half of tribulation, on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way of the kings from the east. So if you look at where I pointed that scripture out, as a matter of fact, if you see that surrounding areas in the upper right, and I circled the area of Euphrates. So that would have, for a land army, that would have to be dried up in order to cross it. Euphrates is one of the biggest rivers. What's interesting, I show you a highlight in the middle of what the Euphrates is today, and it's drying up. It's not dried up, but it is. And it looks like that sign in the middle is the Greek representation of Omega. So remember that we talked about Alpha, Omega, the Aleph and the Tav, beginning and the end. Could this be a foreshadow? Because we see the eclipse, right? Could that be the beginning? And then at some point down the road, there will be a tribulation in 7 more years. So all of these things I'm looking at and saying, well, to me, these are foreshadow of things to come. It's beyond coincidence. I want to talk a little bit more about China, just some things that are in the news right now. We found out that there was Chinese weapons in Gaza. China has an extensive arm industry by definition. It does not sell weapons to non-state entities. Nonetheless, they were found there. Does that mean China was arming the Palestinians and the Arabs in that area, or was it through a third party? We don't know, but they were found there. Here's another interesting thing. China has a space plane. They launched a small reusable space plane this past December, similar to the one that one of NASA's space shuttles. I show it to you on the lower left. But it's unmanned, which the rest of the world knows very little about. Jumping down, according to space.com. The last flight of China's robotic space lasted 276 days, saw the spacecraft eject an unknown object into orbit. It was speculated at the time that the object was either a small satellite designed to inspect Shenlong or a service module that was no longer needed. But just 4 days into its third mission this week, the Divine Dragon appears to have placed 6 mysterious objects into Earth's orbit. They have been designated as object A, B, C, D, E, and F. They are now transmitting signals, and they seem to be operating in collaboration with this aircraft. So think about aircraft released, 6 objects are released into space, but it's honed in on this main aircraft. So in other words, there's a lot of coordination being done in space or surrounding in the Earth with China. For what it's worth, it says here in this article, the United States also operates a robotic space plane. It's called the X-378. Then jump down. So China and Russia are currently working to weaponize space, and the U.S. military is reportedly designing space weapons to prevent other nations from firing upon our satellites. As much as we use satellite for cell coverage, navigation, and supply chain, a disruption in satellite technology could be the spark that sends the world hurling towards war. We have to consider this possibility. There's more to come. So, think about how 45 was ridiculed 2018, 2019, when he launched a space division of the U.S. military. And now they're utilizing it. So China's what I would consider and most people do consider our number one adversary as far as America is concerned and the West. So I'm sure everybody knows China and the threat of war with Taiwan, that they want to take over Taiwan. So I'm going to go back to video. I'm going to show you something. What do you know? We saw a spy balloon across Taiwan a couple of weeks ago. Exact same situation as what the U.S. saw for almost 2 weeks before it was finally shot down off the coast of the Carolinas and the Atlantic. This is a very serious situation because if you look at where Taiwan is, and the United States, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Philippines, they're all in that area and ramping potentially for war. You have an election there next week. So this is high stakes. So in addition to what we're seeing in the Middle East and those wars, we see a nation of China really ramping up, expanding its tentacles, expanding its influence, getting very, very aggressive. And I believe part of this has to do with what I would say is a very weak administration in terms of leadership and accountability and action. So you have all this going on with China. We're going to go back and forth for a couple more now. I want to just show you another highlight of what's happening. So in the upper left, you see the Russia-Ukraine war. So say in the middle, you have a mass exodus going on of Ukrainians, which is causing border problems and population problems, building refugees, essentially. So you see the numbers that are going out. Poland, 17 million, almost 2 million in Slovakia. Hungary, 4 million. Romania, a little under 4 million. Moldova, under 1 million. So these are very, very serious problems for these nations to be taking in these refugees. In addition to war, this is January, and I'm in the United States, and I'm on the East Coast, so it's Northeast is cold, but it's nothing compared to Eastern Europe. So they didn't have that bad of a winter last year, so you hope that may be the case this year, but all reports are it could be a very long, cold winter, which enables the artillery to dig in a little bit easier and to move. I'm saying all of this, and then I'm showing you pictures of the border, and I'm going to show you some more information about some very nefarious developments that are going on in the southern border of the United States. So you have a new Congress, well, not a new Congress, you have a new leadership in Congress. The Republicans hold a slight majority, I think it's 2 seats, and this new leadership has said to the current administration, they control the purse strings, we will not release money for Ukraine, which this administration is fighting to support, and as well as Israel, until you secure our border. In other words, we don't want untold X amount of expenses that aren't even accounted for going to other nations to secure their borders when you've got our borders wide open here. I show you in the lower left the former Prime Minister of England, who's now acting as, I would say, a very wise decision by the Brits, kind of almost similar to a Secretary of State. You know, he's representing England abroad, and here you see him speaking to the new House Speaker Johnson and letting him know how important it is to get the finances released into the Ukrainians. This is obviously a big push for the Europeans. And then you see what's happening on the southern border there, you know, where we have, I forget how many million now. I mean, it's millions. We're talking about hundreds of thousands are coming in December, November. And then in the right-hand side, you see a lot of collusion between the President Rouhani of Iran and his turban on the right. The President of Belarus is behind, to the right of him. Then you see Putin and Xi Jinping. So these are some very, very harsh, direct enemies of the United States, and they're conspiring to take down the United States. They're working in collusion. They see all of the turmoil in the United States, in the West. This is not just U.S., this is the European nations, NATO and whatnot, the European Union, I should say. They're trying to take advantage of this because they don't know what will happen at the end of this year with the elections. So this is all going on. Now I'm going to go back to China and space for a second. So astronomers have seen and identified green lights over Hawaii that they believe are coming from Chinese satellites. What's interesting is there has been documentation that just came out of Chinese-owned satellites. They moved in a trajectory, hovered over the exact island area of Hawaii that was burned. Now, most people, if you're not familiar, Hawaii, parts of Hawaii was just devastated by fires that the accounts of this still haven't come out. You know, you've heard some things from a possible electrical fire. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Clearly information's been hidden. Governments blocked off certain areas. You're not allowed to go in. And, you know, some people may say, well, this is conspiracy theory. I'm just reporting what's being reported, that they've identified these satellites in space. They moved over the Hawaiian island where these fires took place exactly on the day and time that this happened. So this capability is there. Again, you can find this in a couple of different news outlets. And then last with China, just last week, a little over a week ago, December 29th, they signed a construction contract with Iraq to help build and develop a new city near Baghdad. Now, Babylon is 50 miles from Baghdad. I say Babylon because it's the second most mentioned city in the Bible, Jerusalem being first, Babylon. Let me read this, Revelation 17, 3 through 6. Then the angel carried me away, this is near the end of the tribulation, into spirit in the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. So these are the people who are killed during the tribulation, who accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior. I'm saying all this because there's two things to this. So Babylon is no longer, there is that city. It's in like I said, 50 miles from Baghdad in Iraq, near Nineveh. A lot of people, theologians, scholars, and whatnot, have long speculated where Babylon could be, that it could be Rome. It could be, some have said, New York City, because of some of the descriptions and the seaports and the shipping lanes there. The more I look at this, and I will say this too, that when, what's his name, Hussein in Iraq, when he was in power, was building up the city of Babylon. There's been a United Nations initiative. They've poured several $100 million into the restoration of Babylon because there's obviously, there's a storied history there. But the more I look at it, the more I think, there are times when I say, well, God, maybe it was this or that. But this is just me. I think this is literal, that Babylon will be Babylon. You will find that city where it was originally. I'll just leave it at that. So I just found it interesting that China, who is going to be playing a prominent role in the end days, has now entered into contract to help build this city near Baghdad. So Iceland, there's an existing volcanic eruption, and I found this interesting too. So let me go to a video here. Psalm 18:7 through 8 says this: Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills also quaked, were shaken. Because he was angry, smoke went up from his nostrils, devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. This psalm was written by David when he was surrounded by the floods of ungodliness while Saul was pursuing him. It sounds like something that could have been from the Bible, what we're seeing today that's happening in Iceland. We see other similar occurrences in Revelation 8:8, Isaiah 34:9 through 10, and Joel 2:30 and 31. All similar language to what Psalms laid out. I'm saying all this because follow me in the highlights above. If you look, and you can look this up with all the different photos, this eruption has led to fears that a toxic plume of gas venting from a 2.5 mile long fissure, which opened in a matter of minutes. Those gases could be extremely dangerous to Icelandic residents. The lava, highlighting green, the lava field is now around 1.5 square miles in size, and more than 300 earthquakes have been measured since the eruption. This part of Iceland has been dormant for more than 1,000 years until the first eruption in 2021. Another happened in 2022, and then two more this year. The way this fourth eruption happened has startled the seismologists and the volcanologists. The shift in the system's reopening was honestly quite surprising, but it was the scale of the earthquake activity that took most people by surprise. This is according to University of Bristol. A pause between magma's ascent and the onset of eruption is not uncommon for fissure events, but this eruption's prelude was especially intense and hasty. So, just another sign out there. I found the description of the earthquakes and what we see match up with Psalms and some of the other things there. But I guess what I want to get at here is how quickly this can happen. So even these guys who have been studying this and looking at this, the earthquakes and the tremors and the seismic activity took them by surprise, even though they had seen this a couple times before. But I guess what I'm getting at is things can come on you very quickly. Something else happened in December that I remind you that there is no word for coincidence. So the Vatican had reversed its position on banning homosexual couples' marriages. They had, it's long been a staple foundation that they would not be blessing same-sex marriages. They reversed this position in December, and they asserted that a blessing can now be offered to all without requiring anything. In March of 2021, the Vatican's Doctrinal Office, CDF, issued a statement declaring that the Church has no authority to bless homosexual unions, noting that God himself does not and cannot bless sin. So that was their position. They reversed their position in December. The Pope issued this a day before his birthday. Now, a little history. The Pope is from Argentina. His church growing up was in Barcelona. And his name, if you go through some of the history where the popes take different names, it stems from St. Peter. There is a statue in this church of St. Peter, and it's long been there. The day after the Pope announced this was his birthday. On this birthday, there's a lightning tower in this church and right by this statue to negate any lightning coming in. A lightning struck the next day after this was announced on the Pope's birthday. And I'm going to show you on video for my podcast listeners. If you can, go to this video or look it up. You see on the right, there's a before and after, and then I show you an after even more close. So you see Peter with keys, which represents the keys to the kingdom. And then he's got a halo on, which represents holiness. So lightning struck, the statue remained as is, except the keys were destroyed and removed, and the halo was destroyed and removed. So you can make the case that that represents the Lord's answer by removing the keys to the kingdom and the halo, and the fact that it comes from Peter in this area, Argentina, Barcelona. I don't find it to be a coincidence, but I think there's some newscast out there. Here's the information. You decide. Starting to wind this down, very additional information concerning the economy. So what's happening in the United States is, and the global governance has made this clear in their initiatives for the 2030 platform, that the United States cannot be the world's superpower. It's part of it's written out there as part of their statements and part of their objectives. So, in addition to that, we've talked about China and Russia and other nations that are trying to bypass the United States and just remove them. So there's something called BRICS, which was established several years ago, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They have been working on their own currency, and they bought several new nations in, so you now have a 10-nation bloc. This was established in December. They have bought in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia. So those 5, plus the original 5, you now have a 10-nation coalition. There are some that believe, could this be the 10 nations that are referred to in the book of Revelation? I don't know. I think it's way too early to tell, even if it is. And, they thought that about the European Union in the early 90s with the first 10 nations. But it is a force to be reckoned with, without question. So they had a group announcement in January of 2024 where Vladimir Putin had said that 30 nations will be implemented once this is established by the end of 2024, going into the new year. Why is that important? Because they have a currency that they're looking to replace. They're looking to replace the U.S. dollar as the standard. And the U.S. dollar is obviously in dire straits. So because of what happened, Morgan Stanley, I'll put this up on video, downgraded the U.S. dollar. They downgraded the outlook of the U.S. dollar from bullish to neutral on Friday. The global bank cited that the Federal Reserve initiating interest rate cuts led to the decline of U.S. Treasury yields. Their outlook for the U.S. dollar is now officially neutral, downgraded from its previous stance of bullish. The downgrade comes at a time when the Brooks Alliance is advancing to uproot the U.S. dollar's global currency. So I think that's very significant. Next, everybody, well, if you're an American, you're very familiar with the travesty that's happening on our southern border. Our borders are wide open, and nations are pouring in by the hundreds of thousands into the millions. They've escalated or surpassed certain populations of states, and it's intentional. And then here's some very definitive proof of what we can offer. Because remember, you go according to the UN 2030 plan. So there's a company called Muckraker. They obtain multiple maps handed out by non-government organizations across South and Central America. They detail the routes to the U.S. and where to cross the border. These maps are hardly reported by the media since illegal aliens usually lose the maps along the way. They were able to obtain blueprints directed visiting numerous NGOs, non-governmental organizations, along the migration route. And they report this. The collapse of the U.S. southern border is the result of a carefully planned and deliberately executed industrial mass migration program. So the maps are a little small here. You can get them online if you'd like to. If you go to Muckraker, I think it was somewhere near late December. Map number one is distributed by the NGO Amigos del Tren, Friends of the Train. Number two by the Red Cross. Number three by the United Nations International Organization of Migration. Four distributed by Doctors Without Borders in Spanish. And five, RV4, Refugees and Migrants from Venezuela. Venezuela being another one of our adversaries. And then the pamphlet on the upper right, they're giving instructions to everybody that's crossing. Where to get food, where to get water, what to do when you cross certain borders, how you get to communicate with your family, what to do, what to say, when you go to court, or if you're interrogated, or if you're interviewed, or if you're not, then go here and go there. This is all a carefully planned attack against the United States. It's being supported by many different agencies. I'll leave it at that. I think it's pretty obvious. So, as I wind this down, I wanted to close with two things that one concerns me, and one makes me go, things that make you go, I see two prominent things coming out right now. What I'm calling, is this potentially a death culture? And from the river to the sea, we will be free, meaning Palestine. And they're promoting the Palestinians that flew in on the like paratroopers, and led to these killings. And I remind you in the lower left of what those killings were actually like. So that is it's one thing to say that this land is ours, meaning Palestinians or Arabs, if they believe that. But this is calling for the extermination of the Jewish people. They want to remove this from the human race, from the face of the earth, and it is satanic. It is evil at its core. So you have what I believe is a death culture. The other thing that I'll look for, particularly in America, and I know in Europe, but we're entering an election year, and they being the left, have made no bones about it. They are going to push like crazy abortion. So we had the overturning of Roe v. Wade, giving it back to the states this past June, I believe, in 2023. The left lost their minds. And even though you can go to many different states if you are so inclined, but obviously, from a Christian perspective, all life is precious. God makes it very clear that at the moment of conception, the baby is a baby. I've said this before. When this law was first put into effect in the 70s, it was supposed to be for extreme emergencies, certain dire situations. Since then, we have learned so much more, that the baby feels pain in the womb, that they have emotions, they have feelings. We know about the development of the babies now. We have the technology, obviously, 40, 50 years later. And they're, instead of going to these certain circumstances, they've escalated to the point of even after the baby is born, if they were attempted to be aborted, they can still be killed. It's a death culture that I believe is coming on strong, and this is my opinion, I believe its roots are evil. You can, and I realize, and let me just say this, if you ever had an abortion and you are not a believer in Jesus, no matter what you've done, and we've all sinned, we all fall short. I do it not that, but I mean, I'm a sinner, and it's only by the grace and the kindness and the goodness of God that I'm delivered. I say all that because no matter what you've done in your past, if you are heartbroken that maybe an abortion took place, you can be forgiven, and I believe firmly in my heart that if you are, you would see that child in heaven one day. But this is kind of the point of what we're at. So the title of this presentation was Numbers, Wars, and the New Year. And there's a gentleman, Pastor Brewer, I believe, down in Texas. He says that he likes to look at numbers. When he sees the Bible, a lot of times he sees them in numbers. And he pointed out a couple of things here that I thought were very, very interesting. So we know we're in the new year 2024 on the Gregorian calendar. The Jewish Hebrew calendar, the year is 5784, and that goes from September all the way through. So where we've gone from 2023 to 2024, it's 5784, and later in 2024, it'll be 5785. Here's some interesting things. If you take 5784, 5 plus 7 plus 8 plus 4, it equals 24. It is the fourth year on the 80th in the Hebrew calendar. It is the fourth year on the 20th in the Gregorian calendar. The 84th verse in the New Testament is Matthew 4:20, and it's this: "And they straightway left their nets and followed him." Let me put this on video for you too, in case you like to copy any of this down. He also notated that be watchful is mentioned in the New Testament 24 times, repentance 24 times. If you go to Revelation, there are 24 elders around the throne. Throne in the New Testament is mentioned 24 times. Lamb in Revelations is mentioned 24 times. Why is there 24 hours in a day? And there's a little over 24,000 miles around the diameter or the circumference of the earth. So you have all of these things pointing to 5784. It is also, much like you have letters and numbers that are assigned to the Hebrew calendar. The 5784 means open door. So, what does that mean? And I'll go back to what I said in the very beginning for myself, where the Lord said, lean in. So, this is my way, hopefully, of casting a net. If you're a believer in Jesus, wonderful. If any of this information helps you, maybe share with somebody else, a non-believer or somebody who's just not sure, that's great. I'm casting a net, if you will. And I think that's really what we're all called to do. So I've laid out some things here that can be a little bit alarming to some, the wars, the rumors of wars, what's happening around the world, the economic conditions. But this was all foretold thousands of years ago, so it takes nobody by surprise. So as a result of, knowing Jesus in my heart and knowing where, the beauty of prophecy is, we know what is to come. And what did the Lord say? He said, be still and not be, I'm paraphrasing, but do not be alarmed. Do not worry. I give you peace. The peace I give you, surpasses all understanding. So it's a wonderful place to be at, and it also means that we are closer to the Lord's return. Could it be tomorrow? Sure. Could it be 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Sure. We don't know. But with all the signs that are appearing, and the biggest sign is the nation of Israel had to be in place. In 1948, that happened. And, we're roughly coming up to, surpassing a generation since. So it means, it could be coming very, very soon. And it's no coincidence. It's no coincidence. The world is fighting against Israel, this tiny little piece of real estate the size of New Jersey, the whole world all around us. and yet they're fighting over this little sliver of land. Why? Because God calls it his land. Jerusalem is his. So it's very clear, if you want to look at things objectively, Satan is out to get Jerusalem and to take down God's people. So I take comfort in that because he's going to lose. His future has already been foretold. So hopefully there's been some information here that will help you. I just want to close by thanking you, reminding you, February 3rd, if you can, I'd love to see you in the presentation. It's going to be a great time. If you have questions or comments about any of this information, email russackoutlook@gmail.com, comment online, share the information, YouTube, Rumble, social media, we're all over that. So I just, again, I want to thank you. My name is Mark. You've been listening to the Russak Outlook. And remember, as always, just my opinion.